Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Stephan Liozu is Chief Value Officer of the Thales Group. He is also an adjunct professor and research fellow at Case Western Research University's Weatherhead School of Management. I encourage you all to connect with him on LinkedIn. Stephan, welcome.
Hello, everyone, and happy to be here with you to discuss one of the critical component of value-based pricing, which is finding all the information about your competition. And ironically, one would ask, what is it that we're talking about competitive intelligence when we are discussing customer value? Yes, it is indeed a bit of a contradiction, but you'll quickly find out through my presentation that you do need, a very deep competitive intelligence to do value-based pricing, and as part of value-based pricing, to conduct your EVE model, your customer value models, so that you can always compare yourself to your next best competitive alternative. So we're going to go in details, on the, what you need to do in competitive intelligence, who needs to do it, and pretty much go down to the nitty-gritty on how do you find competitive pricing levels in B2B and in B2G, business to government, which is obviously very complicated. In B2C, it's I would say a little bit easier because you can do web searching and scrubbing and automatic competitive intelligence, but not in B2B and B2G. So this is the topic of today. I'm going to obviously put things into context, and as if you've done reading about the pricing orientations, you'll always remember that you do need to set price based on the 3 C's. Other thought leaders and consultants have gone everywhere to between 3, 6, and 10 C's. I like to keep it simple, and pretty much you have customer value, which is going to be calculating the maximum price the customer should be willing to pay for, and then lowering that down, obviously based on pricing moderators. You have your cost, which is pretty much your floor. You need to make a margin. That's what we are all in business for. And in between, you do have a lot of competition components, competitive components that would, make you, change your price level based on, all these factors. And this is what Ken Monroe calls the price discretion zone. So anyway, you'll use the 3 C's all the time. And it's not one or the other. They are not mutually exclusive. You need to know your cost to calculate the margin. You need to know what competition is doing to be able to run your value models. And obviously, you need to understand the value you deliver to your customers so that you can compare apples to apples. And this is an important point in the contextualization of my speech today, because lots of people think that because we're doing cost plus, then we got to move to stop doing cost plus and move to value-based pricing. Well, you still need to know your cost, and that's going to be informing your price decision at the end. So, and this, is a statement that I keep repeating on and on and on, not only in Thales, but when I make a lot of presentations. You need to do value-based pricing. You require an in-depth understanding of your competitors, their offering, their performance, their position, and their pricing levels. So I'll get into all the components that you need to understand in the competitive pricing levels, and pricing behavior, pricing structure, pricing strategy, and someone needs to do that work. So who it is, then we'll talk about this, is, do you have a competitive intelligence group, or do you have a process that describes and gives guidelines on how to do CI, competitive intelligence? But bottom line is someone needs to do it. And I will go to the extent, of saying that you really cannot do enterprise level value-based pricing and value-based strategy in general if you do not know your competitors. And I know that's a bold statement. You could, play around with it. You could, maybe do a plain vanilla value propositions in absolute. But if you really want to position you versus the next best competitive alternative, one or multiple, you need to know them inside and out. And this is why. So you see, in my 10 years of working in value-based pricing, not only studying it academically, but also deploying large-scale transformational projects and small pilot programs for multiple clients. And today, doing that in Thales, I quickly found out that you do need customer intimacy. That's no doubt, and you do need deep knowledge of competitors. And I classified. I tried to put that in the matrix because everybody loves matrix, but with low, medium, high on both dimensions, and that's going to shape pretty much the scope of your value-based pricing projects. So if you're just starting in your marketing transformation, or if you are just becoming a company that is acquiring customer data, customer operations, process information, voice of the customer research, so you position yourself in the low to medium, and obviously as you go along the deployment of your programs, then you gain into customer intimacy and into customer maturity. And the same with competition. Lots of people do informal competitive intelligence. It is up to product line managers, it is up to managers, up to the sales leadership to find competitive intelligence, and it's not part of the process. Many times it's not part of the process. So low, medium, high. So depending on where you are on these two, I would say, maturity processes, then you could aim at doing either pilot projects or targeted program, or an enterprise-based pricing, value-based pricing transformation. But imagine if you have good customer intimacy and zero competitive information, then it's going to be very difficult to do value-based pricing. Now you may do general value propositions and general value statements based on general, the customer doesn't do anything, and then right now we're going to give them a lot of saving based on the customer doesn't do anything. So that would be a typical case when you're selling a software and you're replacing the customer does it themselves, or you're replacing an internal process of the customer. But if there is an incumbent in there, or if there is a competitor in there, or if the customer has a strategic procurement process where they need to have 3 strategic competitors in every bid, then you're going to lack that information. And as a result, you may go in front of the buyers and the customer showing your value proposition, but it's going to be in absolute, not in relative terms. So as you move towards your, I would say, marketing maturity levels, and you will need both, and that, frankly, is going to require deep investments in customer intimacy programs, customer insights program, value and use analysis, doing some market research in conjoint, and willingness to pay research on one side. On the other side is going to be doing deep competitive assessments, profiling of your competitors, customer satisfactions, surveys comparing you versus your competition to get the performance data. Lots of investments in processes and methods, and in human resources, human capital to do this. So that's my pretty much, if there is one slide that shows what are the 2 critical dimensions of value-based pricing to be successful and to move along the deployment curve, I would say that those are the 2. So quick reminder on what is value-based pricing. So if you read a lot about this, you will find that it's typically anywhere between 4 to 10 steps. I propose 6 steps, and this is the heart of the book that I published in 2016, Dollarizing Differentiation Value. I didn't invent the 6 steps. This came out of the at the time, the strategic pricing group, and the work by Tom Nagel and his compadres, and then over time became what I call the reference of the steps of value-based pricing. And number 1 and number 2 are the critical foundations of value-based pricing, and it's really related to the matrix that I just showed. You need to understand your competition. You need to have deep knowledge about them. You need to understand who you compete against, who's the next best alternative, and then that is going to be done by segment. The second step, which is probably done in parallel to the first step, is doing good customer segmentation. And it goes back to customer intimacy. Who are my segments? And then within the segments, what is the buying center? Who makes the decision? What are customer journeys? What are customer personas? All this work feeds into the knowledge or deep intimacy of your customers. Once you know 1 and 2, then you decline the rest of the value-based pricing approach, identify differentiation by segment, quantify that value, estimate the value pool to share, and then using moderators, you're going to price within the value pool. And obviously, you're going to look at the other 2 C's at some point to do the pricing decision. So remember, the 3 C's are always in the background. So this is one of the C, and you get out of the exercise, whether it's for a product family or for a product, and you would come up with, we think we can capture 20% of the value pool, the other 80% will be given to the customer as an incentive to switch to us or to stay with us. So this is the heart of the book, and there's a chapter for each of the steps, with lots of examples and techniques. And as a matter of fact, there is a chapter on how to do competitive intelligence work and how to find competitive pricing levels in B2B. So looking at these 6 steps now, and what needs to be done in competitive intelligence. And frankly, in the Thales group today, this is what we do on a daily basis. And this is what I train our entire marketing network and a lot of people outside of the marketing network on. We need to have competitive intelligence to do value-based strategy. Because we do value-based pricing, we are deploying the methodology, but it is part of value-based marketing, transformation of marketing processes in Thales. So it starts obviously with knowing your competitors, as I mentioned before, first step, and for that you would do a landscape. So what's called a competitive landscape, where you would look at your direct competitors, your indirect competitors, your future competitors, and maybe your secondary competitors. This is a tool that has been used a lot in the CI world. And at least it gives you one of the ecosystem map or landscape of all your competitive pressure. Here we also use Michael Porter to understand, the 5 forces, to understand what, what's going on as far as the competitive intensity, the rivalry level, who's fighting against what, and then also looking at the network, the connection between competitors. So lots of work to be done here in the mapping side. Then the number 2 is building your competitive matrix. Who are your direct competitors and what are they doing? And that's an Excel document that you could use to start listing your competitors. Now the question would be, you may have 100 competitors. You may have 1,000 competitors, depending on where you are, and there's going to be local ones, there's going to be regional ones, there's going to be global ones. And this is why you need to do this. You need to kind of rationalize who is it that I'm competing against at the global level, at the local level, and indirect competitors. And don't forget the future competitors, especially if you're in industrial markets today or working in digital transformation, where the GAFAMs, the FANGs, whatever you call them, are coming in and entering traditional legacy industrial markets. So this is the base. Out of this you have a landscape map, you have a competitor's profile, you have some value map potentially that you start thinking about, and it's really showing that you know who you compete against, and at any point of time you have a list of strategic bids or long-term contracts you're going to put in front of your customers, and you're going to find out you're able to tell them, I know who my 1, 2, 3 competitors are going to be. Number 2, then you need to do it by segment. So you have 5 segments, or 3 or 4 or 5 customer segments. Then for each of the segments, because the needs are different and the profile of each segment is different, you might have a different list of competitor, and you might have a different ranking of the strength of his competitors. So this is typically a matrix in a PowerPoint document that I present to the team, and it's an empty, I would say, template, and then you would do segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, and list your competitors. And this is essential, because at the end, when you move to levels, the step 3, 4, and 5, this is where you start getting into who are the reference values, who are the next best competitive alternatives, right? Because frankly, you cannot do 100 value model for one offer. If you have 100 competitors, you're gonna do this based on who are the the most dangerous, threatening competitors in the mind of the customer. This is how you identify your NBCA, right? So you may have 4 of them, 3 of them, and for these 3, you will do the rest of what I have here: competitive assessments, competitive benchmarks, and a deep competitive pricing analysis, right? So that will, that looks like a strength and weaknesses, that looks like looking at breaking down the performance of their products or services, that looks at doing inventory of their capabilities. So this is a deep analysis, and typically this is where you might go to your competitive intelligence group to get that done, or you might hire a consultant to do this for you. So that requires time, resources, and potentially cash to go out and hire consultants to do. So this informs then your analysis of differentiation and the quantification of customer value versus your competitors. Okay. Last step is pricing in the value pool. There's going to be there a lot of information coming from your competitive information. So what is the pricing behavior of your competitors? So let's say you have a price cutter, a low-cost producer competing against you in a region, and you're going to do a value model versus the low-cost slash price cutter. Then you know potentially that you may enter in a price war. The propensity of that competitor to enter in a price war is very high. So that may change the way you price in the value pool. Right. So in the pricing moderators, what I call the competitive moderators, that will take maybe your pricing in the value pool down. Right. So there is a series of moderators, which I'll show you in the later slide, that you need to consider and you need to understand and you need to study. So that one slide here is a summary of all the competitive intelligence you need to do value-based pricing. And there's a lot. And this is why I go back to that matrix: is you need to understand your competitors better than they know themselves. And you need to have the discipline and a process to do that competitive analysis. Otherwise, you're doing value-based pricing in absolute term, us versus the competitors, the customer is doing nothing. And generally speaking, what comes out of this are plain vanilla, I would say generic value proposition that are not truly quantified versus competition. So, and obviously, based on the offers and based on what you delivering to the market, the need for CI increases. So for products, let's say you're doing a phone versus another phone, or a radio system versus a radio system, or just-in-time delivery versus just-in-time delivery, it is easier to find high-level competitive information. You may go to the website, you may go to customer surveys, you may go to PDFs that are published on distribution websites, and you will find the assessments of you versus competition. But as you go down into a complex system, an entire portfolio of competition, this is where it gets very complicated, because you may have service and products that are bundled. You may have integrated solutions and complex systems. And we find that, we look at this every day in Thales when we are, building satellites and launching satellites in space and providing communication and SATCOM services. These are complex systems. The satellite is not a table. So how do you find the competitors' information, the technology they might use, with the gaps in features and functionalities they may include in their next software that requires deep knowledge of them? So it depends on what you offer. So your companies may be all over these lists right here, selling software or selling services and maybe corporate solutions. So you're going to need some reinforcement there to make sure that you get to the data. So the end of really the heart of the matter is to find your true competitive advantage. You will see in the book, if you're getting the book, if you're lucky to get the book today, that I proposed a VIRO model, which has been used, for decades in strategy, and pretty much, this helps you find your true differentiators versus your NBCA, right? Or your NBCA is plural. Does it bring value to the customer? Is it rare? Do you have 20 competitors, 50 competitors? Is it hard to find? Is it costly to imitate? How fast can your competitors imitate you? And then are you good at executing? Can you exploit that competitive advantage? And really, this forces you to find your true differentiators. And when you do value models, you cannot put more than 3 to 5 variables, value drivers in your model. So this is something we do religiously in Thales today, where we are true to ourselves, or trying to be true to ourselves, and then extract the true differentiators. And that's that's the name of the game, because you can't put things that you think are differentiators, but at the end you're going to quantify the value, and you quickly realize, it's not a differentiator, and it's not it doesn't bring true customer benefits, because you remember, you never dollarize a differentiator, you dollarize the customer benefits that goes with the differentiation. So you really have to be honest with yourself, and you have to assemble a multifunctional team here and compare yourself to competition. And this is where we typically find that we're lacking intimacy and deep knowledge of competitors. It's not readily available. It requires additional thinking and searching and connecting with people who know competition. So we've deployed a series of techniques with the support from our strategic business intelligence group, but our maturity is still in development there. But this is the acid test of your differentiation, and I typically, when we do value models, when we do EVEs, at some point, when we get into arguments, say, well, you quantify and you find there is a little bit of differentiation. Yes, we're going to save the customer some money, but when I ask them the question, when I ask the group the question, is the customer going to pay for this? And then usually, if the answer is no, then it's not a true differentiator. If they're not willing to pay for something, which it means the V here in the real, the valuable, it's not real, right? It's not valuable, because typically the higher the value, the higher the willingness to pay. That's my assumption, and that's what I reinforce in the selection of differentiators. So you all know the EVE framework. Not new, it's been around for 40 years or some. It is really about, you do need the reference value, you need to find the competitor, and you need to find their pricing level, which I'll give to you. It's difficult in business to business and business to government, and industry to industry. It's very hard, because you never know what is the net price, what are the special conditions that become after the fact, and what is in the contract, because the contracts are confidential. Then you add on the positive differentiation value, no more than 3 to 5 drivers. You deduct negative differentiation, which is cost unique to doing business with you, training, additional warranty, lower ramp-up time, etc. And then you calculate your differentiation value, which is called the value pool, the unique value you provide to your customer. And you see on the right, you do need to do that for 1 or 2 or 3 competitors that are in the mind of the customer, and then you need to know their pricing. So that's a quick refresher of the EVE. If you go on the leverage point side, you'll see lots of videos on how to do this if it's new to you. So first question that I get is, which NBCA do I pick, right? How do I select my reference value? Well, what I usually recommend the teams in Thales is to prepare a competitive landscape and be very exhaustive. Put them all in there, right? List your global direct, local direct, indirect, partial, future competitors, and be exhaustive and say, well, we have 58 competitors, or we have 25, or we have 120. Okay, then you prepare a competitor segment matrix. You allocate them to the segment. So that you can find out what is the competitive pressure and the number of competitors by segment. Then you got to find a way to rank them. So you list maybe a series of criteria. I propose a few here, and then you're going to do a 1 to 10, a 1 to 3, so that you come up with the top 3. So intensity of competition, how deep they are in the customer mindshare, how ingrained they are in the procurement process of your customer. Are they part of the strategic supplier list, you think? Are they very innovative? Whatever criteria are important in rating them, I would say no more than 10, and then you do a rational rating, and then come up, and typically the salespeople will tell you, I always run into these competitors. These are always on every bid that we submit, we compete against them. So And then at the end of the day, you know, and this is why you need a software like Leverage Point is you will do multiple value model for one product, one customer. Customer A versus three competitors, three value models. Because at the end of the day, whether you do that by segment or by customer, there will be different reference values because you never compete against one or two, except maybe in some very large complex bids uh, in business to government. But generally speaking, you always go through, you know, multiple suppliers bidding and then the top two or three coming out and then final decision. So because you will do hundreds of value models, you need a software to manage all of this. You cannot do this in Excel or PowerPoint. So we are using Leverage Point today in Thales. We're deployed it in the group at the corporate level with multiple actors and champions using it, and then in one division that's using it a lot more than the rest. And that helps you with the management of MVCAs and multiple models. So the reference value is the heart of the value model. As you see, it's a base. So you need to have something down there. So here's multiple options. First of all, you have the pricing level, which is great. And obviously, you got to take it with a grain of salt. You got to make sure that it's precise and triangulated. So, and 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 coming not out of a mystery black box. It's, you know, it's got to come from sources that you trust. So that's first option. The second option, you don't have the precise level, so you will use a range. And you know, we've done lots of models where we actually put a range. You know, anywhere between 100 and 120 million for that specific offer, uh, for that specific competitor. And in business to government, we use price to win, and within the price to win methodology, we have price to compete, which is typically where we know typically competitor A is going to be pricing at that level. This is a range of where we expect a competitor to price out, because you know the history shows that they always price within that range, right? That's option two. Option three is you use the market price, because you do, there are so many competitors and so many pricing. Then you say, well, typically for a system like this or for a product like this, you know, a price range is between 80 and 100, and then you use that as a reference value. That's a third choice. Not the best, not ideal, but you know what? It's better than nothing. It's always better to get your pricing level of competitors. I give it that to you, but sometimes you don't have it. The last resort is we have no information. We don't know. Then we don't do nothing. We use the do nothing, you know, estimating that the customer actually does not use one of our competitors. So that becomes in absolute. So we don't compare against NBCA. The NBCA becomes the customer doesn't use that product yet. So they use something else. They use an internal process. They use something they built themselves, and we're gonna replace that with our offer. Not ideal, because it becomes more in absolute. It's more generic, and it is better to find out if there is an incumbent, if there is some of our competitors in there. And at the end of the day, a good CAM, key account manager, or a sales manager should be able to tell you who's entrenched, who's in there at the customer already, who's talking to the customer. When you talk to the customer, you know, who's already in there making a pitch. Or so that's a last resort. At the end of the day, you know, as we a lot of the time, you know, we do hackathons. We have dozens of teams coming up and doing value models all at once in one day. Some teams know more than others, but we never use that as a reason to stop doing value models, right? So if we don't know the reference value, we use some kind of information and we continue working until we find the reference value. Now, the last step, you know, step number 6 of value-based pricing, as you remember, is pricing in the value pool. And for that, in the book, you'll see I propose 50 moderators. Some are positive moderators, so some are negative moderators, some are internal moderators, and some are external moderators. And those will allow you to move up and down in the value pool. How much of that value pool, the value that you create for the customer based on your differentiation versus competition, can you capture? And in there, in the 50, there are competitive moderators, and it requires you to know your competitors. So for example, what is a typical behavior in the response of your competitors when you win the bid? Do they attack you somewhere else? So that will influence the way your aggressive, you know, behavior might be in an offer or with a customer. So anticipating the behavior of your responses, from competition is important. The industry structure, the number of competitors is a negative moderator. The intensity overall, are we in a price war, or is it a period of calm? Can we stay away from the price war? Competitive entrenchment is how deep is the relationship between the competitors in place and the customer, right? It's the same as customer relationship with competitors. Sometimes the competitors are good at creating switching cost, so it's difficult to dislodge them as an incumbent. Sometimes they have awesome relationship with the customer or the buyer. How are we going to win that? How much of an incentive do we have to give, to the account to switch? And who else do we have to talk to in the customer account to be able to convince, the switch? Propensity to enter in price war. You have to make sure that if you do a value model versus an irrational competitor, you anticipate what the response may be. So maybe you don't price so aggressively. You want to go in and not do a frontal attack, and may do more of a flank, attack on the flank. And then typically looking at the past behavior of competitors that are sensitive to market share. And that you could find in the annual report. In an annual report, you'll find if the competitors put a lot of emphasis on volume, on growth, on market share. So then if you priced your product based on differentiation versus a huge account of your competitors, how aggressive are you going to be? How much of that market share do you want? So you have to be careful, and understanding the desired market share and what you deserve versus competition. So you see, there's a lot of work to be done here, and we do this for us in a series of techniques that we have. And one of the profile, I created a profile for competitors on 10 dimension, 10 elements of understanding the behavior of competitors, and that's a simple PowerPoint with low, medium, high, and so that helps us understand. So what do we use in Thales today, and what I usually recommend that when you do competitive analysis, we usually promote these 6 techniques, methodologies. First of all, we do competitive reviews, black hat reviews, and war games. And those are simulation, one-day simulations where we put ourselves in the skin of the competitors and we try to beat Thales. And it works very well because you get people who know the competitors playing the role of competition, trying to beat us. And at the end, we do a debrief on what could be surprising from our competitors, what could they offer that could really reduce our chance of winning. I mentioned the competitive profile metrics and the value map. Those are good tools that, and if you type that in Google, you'll find all kinds of different templates. It's a lot of work on value maps. I design a kind of a Excel tool that helps us do value maps. It's very helpful, and people like the visual representation of us versus competition on the value and price matrix. Detailed technical and product benchmarks. This is going down to the granular level of comparing us versus competition. So if for example, you have a cell phone or an antenna, you're going to look at the weight, the dimension, the rotation, the degree, the speed, the maintenance, and you maybe list 100 criteria, and you compare you versus competition, and then you try to find pockets of differentiation. Price to win analysis is more for business to government, which is a deep understanding of competition, their cost structure, and rebuilding pricing based on the cost structure of your competitors and then their capabilities, and then creating a price to win window where you think they're going to be placing their pricing and the customer budget, available budget, and then you make a best decision based on this. So it's at the end, it's a recommendation of what is the price to win versus the competitors' capabilities, the competitors' cost structure, and the customer information. I mentioned number 5, we try to model the pricing behavior of our competitors. And then the number 6 is very complicated. It's typically more used on services. When you do a competency inventory, capability inventory of your competitors in customer service, in tech support, in software support, and if you're in the service business, really understanding how do they tangibilize their service offering versus yours. So this is, I'm not an expert in competitive intelligence, but I studied that. I took the PPS, course on competitive intelligence as part of my CPP. There are lots of associations that can help you. There's a certification in doing competitive analysis, and it's everybody's responsibility. At the end of the day, we cannot all rely on our competitive intelligence group to do this if we have one, we all have to learn how to do some of these. Product line managers, marketing managers, even sales managers, key account managers should be able to start digging information and profiling your competitors. So competitive pricing is hard to find. It cannot be a bingo machine like I have here. You know, typically it's like we are trying to come out of a thin air with the pricing of competition. We have to have a process to find the pricing of competition. It requires people thinking about it and gathering information from the market. And it's not going to be the bingo machine that's going to randomly give us price levels. So I typically recommend the following process, and it's, if you're starting from scratch, it's 90 days to be operational. If you have already these, you know, and you could beef it up, but you know, you'll be surprised if you put your attention and you have intention in finding competitive pricing information and starting a spreadsheet with what everybody's hearing in the market, what distributors are saying, what you hear at the conference, and then start tracking these now and having more accountability on finding and listing competitive pricing level, right? So it is finding what's inside the CPI, competitive pricing intelligence, and then creating a process or formal mechanism and process to systematically collect all the price points that you hear. And typically that is part of the pricing council. This gets reported into the pricing council. And it could be, the lead could be given to a champion, either CAM or marketing manager or someone in charge of competitive intelligence, to gather all these nuggets of pricing information, right? And that, you know, either is a tool, a database, or something that you could tie in the leverage point system as a functionality, because you're going to need it, right? And you need to collect multiple price points to be able to get to the final decision. So the key factors for me in competing and really getting that in the B2B is the triangulation. So you're going to do a lot of competitive pricing research. You're going to try to find all the sources out there, internal, external. Someone needs to put a process behind it, right? And then you triangulate, because a lot of the information you're going to get, the pricing information, is going to be not good. It's going to be wrong. So you need to hear that multiple times to be able to triangulate and be confident that you have an accurate pricing level, right? But remember, the worst case is you create a range, right? So so the key success factor is about the intention and attention, triangulation, and connecting them. Once you have the process, even if it's in a spreadsheet, connecting that to your value modeling process in Leverage Point or in Excel, and leveraging the technology to manage the data. Now in B2C, it's all different because it's done automatically by software that can scrub and find all the publicly listed pricing level. In B2B, you're going to have to do that from scratch and do it yourself. So it's an art and it's a science, really. So I know I'm blabbing away here. I have a lot to say about this because I'm very passionate about differentiation value and customer value modeling. But to do this, I found that I had to learn on my own how to do competitive intelligence, and as I said, I took the online class of PPS to do this online course. That's part of my CPP. That was good, and then I did a lot of research. And today, I'm collaborating with our strategic business intelligence group, and then we learn from each other, and we continue doing this to become better at understanding our competitors. So that concludes my formal presentation. I think we can move to some questions, and I appreciate the time and attention today.
Great, thanks, Stephan, for sharing those insights. We've had a few questions come in during the webinar, and there's still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen. While you're entering, a reminder to complete the 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to be entered into the raffle for 5 free copies of Dollarizing Differentiation Value. Now, to give you a couple more minutes to enter your questions, a few words on Leverage Point and how we help teams across the world not only build customer value models like you just saw, but also transform them into valuable sales tools customized in real time to your target customer. Why is it important to embed this powerful pricing and value information into your sales process? Forrester Research states, the first vendor to succeed in communicating a vision of value to executives wins the business 74% of the time. So how can you guarantee that you'll be that vendor? Well, your sales team needs to bring their approach into the 21st century, meaning it must be value-focused, customer-centric, and digital. The traditional sales approach was created to educate a buyer, but today's buyers are more educated than ever, spending more than 60% of their buying process researching online before even talking to a rep. Do away with the standard corporate overview, long PowerPoint presentation, extensive questioning, and features and benefits review. Instead, create a crisp digital presentation that highlights what you're actually going to deliver to that customer, qualitatively, quantitatively, and financially. Present data that can be revised so the prospect can visualize financial results, and leave behind a unique presentation that is tailored to them. Sounds great, right? But where do you start? That answer, case studies. As Stephan just pointed out, the final success factor in collecting competitive pricing intelligence is leveraging technology to manage CPI data. For most organizations, case studies are the primary tool your sales team uses to convey your organization's value propositions. In a sense, the benefits you gain from collecting CPI can only be fully realized if your sales team can adequately communicate value to a prospective customer. There's a lot of great content your organization probably already has, but it's static and not tailored to the customer you're trying to speak with. Case studies are a prime example. They very clearly give you a crisp background and get straight into solutions and financial results. Buyers download them from your site, ask for them after a sales call, and make buying decisions based off the financial results displayed. So why are salespeople only using them as a leave behind? Why isn't there an easy way to convey your value to your prospect's specific needs? Maybe it's because they're not digital, but now they can be. Embedding this information into your sales presentation is the only way to be the first vendor to communicate a vision to value. And remember, according to Forrester, that vendor wins the business 74% of the time. I took some screenshots from our interactive sales presentation tool to give you an example. This is a digital presentation. Everything you see can be customized live for the prospect. This is a fictional example where we embedded an existing static case study into the presentation. To start, we frame the customer's challenge. After providing industry insights, we jump into the solutions that were provided to a similar customer within a case study. Business productivity improvements, risk mitigation, IT infrastructure cost savings, and IT staff productivity benefits. We then get straight to the financial results, quantifying the value that was delivered from each solution. Again, all of this is customizable. Although the information came from a case study for a customer similar to the prospect on the line, you may find that the prospect wants to change a few numbers to better match their company. With the digital presentation, all that is doable then and there. Recalculating the total value delivered and creating a presentation completely unique to the prospect on the line. If you found any of that interesting, we'd love to have you enter into a raffle we're doing every month where we will digitally transform one of your case studies free of charge. Just check the corresponding box in the exit survey upon leaving today's webinar or email us at casestudies@leveragepoint.com. Okay, I see we have some great questions so far. First and foremost, yes, this webinar is recorded and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. All right, Stephan, let's get started. First question, how do you motivate the C-suite to support a transformation to value-based pricing?
Well, typically, unfortunately, the C-suite is not going to change until there is a problem. And the real question is, how do you motivate them to do it when there is not a problem? And the way you do this, someone has to bring the outside in and create a sense of urgency. Because if you do not face an erosion of margin, if you do not face we're leaving money on the table a lot, we're not getting the ROI for innovation, et cetera, then maybe the message is we're making 50% EBIT, but we should be making 20% EBIT, and then you have to show case studies of competitors that are doing much better. So bring in the outside in. And typically this is done through you need to find a way into the C-suite, and the closer you are to the C-suite or to the COMEX, what we call the executive committee, the better, the easier it is. So for example, for me, I report into the CMO, and he has direct link to the C-suite through his boss, and we have an access to the C-suite. We're a big company. We're $20 billion. So as you can imagine, even if you're 3 levels down from the CEO, it's difficult to get access to the C-suite. In other mid-sized companies or smaller sized company, then it's maybe an easier access, where a VP of sales, a VP of marketing is going to understand the message that you want to convey, and we're going to realize we need to do this. Now, typically, again, it comes from the C-suite attending conferences, reading Harvard Business Review, talking to their peers, and this is the best case scenario when they say we need to do this.
Great, thanks, Stephan. So we have another question here from Jesper Wilkin. From Jesper, what is your idea to collect competitive price levels when your company is dominating and have to comply to competition laws?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. I get the question a lot about what's the legal boundaries and the ethical boundaries of finding competitive information and finding competitive price levels. Obviously, everything that we do is checked off by legal, and you cannot enter into spying and espionage and all these things. That's definitely not the right way to go. But and you have to be careful, when you try to access information that would bias the or would definitely create an unfair advantage that is heard of. When companies win bids because they access competitive information that other people couldn't get, either because the customer gave that, or we had a unique relationship there, and then the law kind of turned against them. And so you really have to be careful. And my reference here is to find every possible public information, and you'll be surprised how much people put on LinkedIn and on Google and SlideShare, and how much people talk at trade shows. And so there's a lot of easy things that do not require validation, but you always need to be mindful to stay on the right side of the law. So for me, it's a matter of repeating these and making people aware that there are issues of price fixing, price discrimination, price protection, and you have to be careful. So especially when you're in a dominant position where you may have more access to information than other players in the market.
Great, thanks. So we have another one here. What are the critical elements that organizations need to execute on value pricing? Or alternatively, what strategies work best to improve sales organizations' ability to sell value?
Wow, yeah, that's a big question, and I think you need to read the book, because the whole book responds to this. Obviously, you have to develop your capabilities, as I mentioned, 2 of them: customer intimacy and competitive intelligence. But as you can imagine, there's other capabilities. You have to know how to do segmentation. You have to know how to do competitive intelligence. You have to know how to, do pricing. And so those are the capability side. And in capabilities, you have tangible ones and intangible ones. Obviously, a second one is you're going to have to use, at some point when your maturity level is good enough, you're going to have to use software and tools like Leverage Point is something that I always recommend, and I've used in multiple companies I work for, because at some point you need to industrialize your transformation. You cannot do that in Excel, and PowerPoint is too static. And that is when you bring the salespeople on board into the sales side of a tool like Leverage Point, then it becomes industrial. It becomes easy for them to copy and paste and save value proposition, to reuse them, to modify them, and you need to enable them to become more productive, especially when they manage 100, 200, 300 accounts. So it's very powerful. So at some point, you're going to have to tie your value-based innovation, your value-based marketing, your value-based pricing, and your value-based selling into an integrated approach that will have capabilities and tools, and obviously the culture needs to follow, and everybody needs to work in the multifunctional setting. You need a pricing council. So I mean, I could get on and on and on and on. As part of the transformation, it is a lot of work, but there are things that you could do to accelerate. And for me, when you're ready, having the right tool is the right move. And we're not talking an enterprise deployment. We're talking a cloud-based, very agile cloud-based software that allows you to communicate, collaborate, and enable your go-to-market teams.
Great. So to segment the second half of that question a bit more, so what about sales teams when they need to deal with complex competitive landscapes? For example, multiple direct competitors in addition to doing nothing alternative.
Well, when you get to that point, it really is, you got to, so obviously you have to do the homework at the high level. Who is it? How do they look like? And it's going to be a lot of work because you have a lot of competition, direct, indirect, and so you also need to understand your customers' capabilities, because a lot of the time your competitors are your customers, and that's complex. They may decide to do that themselves and only give you bits and pieces of the offer. But when you get to the specific bid, the specific proposal you're writing, this is where you have to focus on the customer hot buttons, what the customers can do and cannot do, and who do you think is going to compete on that specific bid. And that's where you got to make decisions on who do you think your competitors are going to be, because you cannot boil the ocean and do the entire analysis for 2,500 competitors. So at the specific bid, this is what we do war games, and we do black hat sessions where we'll pick four, the four more likely competitors to go on that complex bid, and then we act like we are them. And we have teams of people actually playing the competitors and designing the technical solution, the commercial solution, the pricing levels, and playing the game all day. And at the end, we quote unquote compete for the offer, and we see who wins. But that puts, and these people obviously know the competitors, so you pick the right people. But at the end of the day, it helps you, refine your competitive priorities, I would say. Now, sometimes on a complex bid, let's say you talk about a €1 billion bill, or a $20 billion bid for nuclear plants or whatever it is that infrastructure. Over the course of the commercial process, you may have to change the order, the rankings of the competitors. New one come in, some get ejected from the process. So it's a very dynamic process. So it's hard, and that's what I keep telling our teams. Someone needs to do this. We need to do it. Otherwise, we go blind in front of the customers. And yes, we may know the customer needs. Yes, we may respond to their pains and gains, but we don't know what the competitors are doing. And maybe they may come out of left field with a proposal that will be so disruptive that will put us out of the running in the middle of the process.
Okay, great. So we have a question from an attendee, Per Ostrom, which is on a similar topic. Per is asking, how big dollar-wise should a segment be, or does it matter?
Well, yeah, so obviously you have to look at your entire population, so population of customers and the market, the market size, and then you could look at, I always recommend 3 to 5 segments. It's going to depend on the number of customers you have, and then I usually move away from the size at that point, because you may have let's say a segment with 10 customers that's very small today, but that could be the next big segment 10 years from now. So we're going to require different offering, different pricing, different hand holding. But obviously, 2 customers representing 1% of the market may not be an intelligent way of segmenting. So if you're doing a scientific segmentation based on transactional data, you have a lot of customers, a lot of transactions, the stats will give you the number of segments, and then will profile for you. If you have 100 customers and you're doing qualitative segmentation, then it's going to be obviously for you looking at the size and the power of each of the segments, and the future projection of that segment, including your share of wallet within the segment, how much market share you want within the segment. So those are considerations that, but they come after the fact. For me, it's first of all, pay attention to customer needs, the preference, how they buy, their buying style, and then when you qualify and profile the segment, this is where you look at size and volume and profit. So that's where it comes, and then you make an intelligent decision. Is that a segment we want to focus on?
Okay, great. So we have a question on a different part of the process from Alan Hollander. Alan asked, Stephan, what is the appropriate level of detail for identification of differentiators? Do you suggest going to the feature functionality level for each product or something broader?
Hey, Alan. I know Alan very well. Thank you for asking that question. So my philosophy on that is you do a total analysis of differentiators. What you put in the value proposition is different. Okay, but you need to understand if you're selling a product, right? Obviously, you're going to go deep into the product features and the characteristics and the attributes to find 1 or 2 nuggets or maybe 10 nuggets. And then you'll decide what are the benefits of each. And then you'll maybe do a product value proposition. But don't forget that you may have divisional differentiators, corporate differentiators, regional differentiators, relationship differentiators. And those at some point, when you assemble the best value proposition, to be given to your salespeople to go in front of the customers, you may have 2 product features, 1 divisional feature, and 1 relationship benefit. So what is the best value proposition that I can put in front of my customers? 3 of the drivers may be quantified, 1 is not going to be quantified, but it is at the end the story that I'm creating. And the beauty of Leverage Point is these value drivers are all documented. You enter all of them, and typically there's going to be a list of 50 to 75 differentiators for in a given offer or in a given division. And then it's the beauty of the software. You click and unclick. So I say, I know the customer wants this. It's a segment A, and they're very focused on services. So I may unclick product features and focus on services and put a relationship value driver. And it's phenomenal how fast you can actually create the profile of your value proposition that will match your customer type. So so the homework is to do as much as you can, but then the story needs to be built, blending your differentiators to match the customer you have in front of you.
Great, thank you, Stephan. So we're running up on the end of the hour, so I was going to wrap up the question and answer session, but thank you again for following up on all those questions.
You're welcome.
So before everyone goes, a reminder to register for next month's webinar during the exit survey. We have a double feature coming up. Peyton Marshall, Leverage Point CEO, and Ed Arnold, our VP of Product, are back to discuss value maps for product management, understanding your differentiation and competitive positioning. So that's it from us today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you to Stephan for your insights. From all of us here at Leverage Point, have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.